Hi, everybody. My name's Chester Y. I'm an addict from Watertown, South Dakota. I got clean December 8th, 1979 in Boise, Idaho. I'm not going to go into a lot of my background and my drug-a-log, so to speak, but I'm going to go ahead and start kind of where I came into Narcotics Anonymous. So I'm going to up my story by about a half hour. I remember, making that first phone call, and when I made that phone call, I had to dial the phone, and I was still just, withdrawn and coming down to shit. So my finger would slip out of the rotary dial, and I'd have to keep starting over again. And it took me about 15 minutes to finally make that call to the phone line. Now, I, like Vito, when I first, I don't know if it was that way for everybody. That's an old Kelly needs to mute her thing there. And anyways, when I first came in, there was no Narcotics Anonymous in the state of Idaho. It was just AA. And so when I made the phone call, I didn't want to call that place, because I had heard some horrible rumors about those guys, that they just wear three-piece suits and they drive big Cadillacs and they got their head up in the air and they don't want nothing to do with you, really. So I didn't want to call them. So there was this little thing below it. It said a social club, it said. And I thought, and it was open, and I thought, well, I think I'm going to call that number. It was called the Grapevine Club in Boise, Idaho. It was called a social club. And so I thought, well, maybe they can teach me how to use without becoming what I come when I use. So I called that number, and this guy, his name was Doc. He answered the phone, and I says, look, I'm reaching out here. I'm trying to get help. I just got out of lockup. Nobody showed up to pick me up. I staggered home. Thank God the family let me in the house. And I'm calling you for help. And he says to me, are you willing to give up using drugs and alcohol on an all-time basis, he says. Now, if you're like me, nobody's never asked us any shit like that, if you know what I mean. And so, I still had a head full of using because I was thinking that they can teach me how to do this shit successfully. So anyways, I lied to him and I says, yeah. And he says, what's your address? And I gave it to him. He says, good, somebody's on their way to pick you up, click. And I'm like, what in the fuck did I just do? They're coming to pick me up. It just totally blew my mind. I didn't know what to do. So I thought, I looked at myself, I was all shitty looking and stuff. And I thought, well, man, I better dress up. So I remembered I had a three-piece suit hanging in my closet. It was all polyester, had the big pointy collars, and I had a tan color shirt and it had big pointy collars, and I had the bell bottom polyester pants, and this is back in the disco days. So anyways, I go in to get that pants out of the closet, and the cat had gotten in the closet. It had been hanging all over that suit, and there was big snarls and shit sticking all out. Well, I put it on anyways. And so anyways, I put my shoes on. I only had one pair of shoes, and they had a hole in them, and my toe was sticking out. Because I was living out of dumpsters at the time, when that all happened. So anyways, they came by and got me, and there was this big cowboy, about 6'6" tall, wearing a big Haas Cartwright 10-gallon cowboy hat. And there was a little sheep herder with him. This is Idaho. And he was about 4 foot, somebody keeps calling me here. He was wearing a flat carnival hat, and he had a cigar sticking out of his mouth, and he had a big old white beard down to his nuts. And I got to get off here, man. The people are calling me. So anyways, he had his beard was hanging way down to his nuts, you know, and I'm like, there ain't no way in hell I'm getting in the car with these guys. And so anyways, they're banging on the door. I'm afraid they're going to tear my door off. So I finally go out there and the guy grabs me by the arm, takes me out. They're not in a car. They're in a really old piece of shit, broken down pickup truck. Had big side racks on it, was full of horse shit. And so they throw me in the middle and we're on our way to that first meeting, you know. Later on, I found out that these guys didn't even have 30 days, so they didn't know how to do a 12-step. So anyways, we're on our way to the meeting and I'm asking them questions about how they do this stuff without having problems. And they're not talking like they're doing anything, you know, they're not drinking, they're not doing any dope, they're not doing any weed. And I'm thinking, well, there's a stop sign coming up. I'm going to bail out and get underneath the bridge. So we come up on the stop sign and I'm going to bail out. And the guy driving, the cowboy, tells him to lock his door. So he throws his handle down to lock the door. That's how you lock them. And I go to smack that guy. I want to hit him in the head and I'm going to push him out the door and get the hell out of there. I'm getting tired of these guys, you know. So anyways, as I'm going to hit him, the cowboy grabs me around the arm and I pull and I can't hit him. So I go to hit him and the little sheep herder guy grabs this arm and I can't hit him. So I'm going like this in the truck and the truck's swerving around, losing a little horse shit out the back on the road. And I'm like, where in the fuck are the cops when you need one? I just wanted to get the hell out of there. But they got me to that first meeting. And when we got to the meeting, he went around, opened the door, stood me up, you know, stood me up against the little guy, grabbed his arms, and we went walking into my first meeting looking like the Three Stooges. You know, and that's how I found recovery. In that room, I have to tell you guys, the first spiritual principle of recovery that I experienced was the spiritual principle of hope. That was the first spiritual principle that I experienced there. And I felt hope for that first time. And I heard, I listened to somewhat of the people were saying in the room. And I saw at the time, I didn't realize it, but the addicts that were going to come out and walk out of there and start Narcotics Anonymous was sitting in that room that day. And after the meeting, they got with me, you know, and my other experience I had at the end of that meeting, they had the newcomers asked us if we had anything we wanted to say. So I raised my hand up, you know, and I was a member of the Moose Lodge, and I tried to sign them all up in the Moose Lodge, but they didn't take. I couldn't get them to join, and I got a resentment out of that shit. So I was mad, and after the meeting, I got outside, and this one guy comes walking up to me. He was the one that was going to meet with Jimmy later on to start the first NA meeting, but I didn't know it. And he says to me, he says, look, motherfucker, I'm going to tell you right the fuck now, dude. You work them fucking steps or die, motherfucker. That's what he said to me. Work the steps or die. And I just stood there and I looked at him. I mean, he got my attention. I identified with that. Work the steps or die. That was my first bite from an addict to another addict coming out of an AA meeting. It was about 4 or 5 months later, one night after a meeting, I was walking out, standing on the step, and those two guys come walking up to me. One's name was John, the other one was Wes. And they says to me, would you like to help us start a new group? And I says, well, what group? What group's that? They says, well, we would like to start a Narcotics Anonymous group. And, you know, I never heard of NA until that moment. And I says, what in the fuck is that? That's exactly what I said to him. What in the hell is that? What? Narcotics Anonymous? And they says, yeah, we're going to start a Narcotics Anonymous meeting on Tuesday night. Would you like to help us? And they told me, just hang around, we'll let you know the time and what it actually did, but it's going to be on a Tuesday. So one of the old timers from AA drove John H. all the way to Van Nuys, California. And this is early 1980, okay? He drove him all the way to Van Nuys, California, and they met with Jimmy K in a parking lot. And at the time, World Service Office was in the trunk of his, they had a P.O. box, and he would meet you and give you literature to start your meeting out of the trunk of his car. And so he met with John, and they brought that back. And then, on a Tuesday night, it was at the Anderson Center, downtown Boise, Idaho on 2nd Street. We started the first meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. And there was quite a few people in the room at the time when we started that meeting, and we were all excited. And I think we only met there about 2 times. And then what happened was that Wes and John, they found a meeting place over on 12th and Grand, downtown Boise on 12th and Grand, just off River Street at the community center. And we started meeting there at 6 p.m. on Sunday. And, the funny thing is here is there's a lot of you that may never have this experience, but my experiences was walking into that first NA meeting and not having, there was no literature rack. There was nobody sitting in the room to greet you. There was no coffee made. The room wasn't set up. Those of us that were walking in the room at that time, we were it. That was the first time that there was actually going to be a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous established. And we named it after the 12th step, called it the Joy of Living meeting of Narcotics Anonymous on Sunday night, Joy of Living, because of what you get after you work the 12 steps. You get the joy of living life. You get freedom from active addiction. And we were excited about it. Well, anyways, what happened was there became some conflict about control issues amongst the members. And there was just a handful of us, because all of a sudden there was 40, and then there was like 15, and then all of a sudden there was like about 5 of us. Well, we weren't very popular, and we were getting shit from the other fellowship, and they would actually sit us down, and I remember old timers saying to me, why in the hell are you doing narcotics, this thing called NA or Narcotics Anonymous, whatever it is, when you have this here? And I would tell them, I says, because we can't have the freedom to talk about our drug addiction in AA. We don't have the freedom. You're only talking about one thing. And then at that moment, it made me think about We Do Recover and Jimmy K's story of what we experienced. About his story was exactly in detail what we were experiencing at that moment with the identification crisis. And we just kept doing it. But eventually, a lot of them just left, and pretty soon I was the only person sitting in the meeting room. And I just stayed there, I sat there, and eventually it probably hit about 3 months and nobody came. And I was about ready to give up. I was about ready to say, fuck this thing, fuck Narcotics Anonymous. I just can't do this no more. I was about ready to, and I would pray about it. I would ask God, my higher power, to give me strength to hang in there through this. And then all of a sudden, one day, this little old guy shows up named Little Marv. And he helped me. He helped me. He came to me from AA, but he tried to start NA in Idaho in 1976. In Boise, Idaho was the first known recorded meeting I know of, and ours was the second, but it didn't take. And so he heard about it, and he came. And I believe that my higher power sent him to me at that moment. And it was just the 2 of us. And then a couple more showed up. There was a couple of ladies Joyce and this other lady showed up, and then a few of the other people that were going to start future groups started to come. And, you know, I can remember sitting in that meeting during that period of time. You know, we didn't, you know, we read the things the way they were written in our readings at that time, the way they were in the manuscript and the gray book and the first and second and third edition up to the revised part. That was our readings we read. And then we would bring up a topic, and usually our topic was the how. And we would say, if you didn't want to talk about the how, you can talk about the now. And so we shared what we were living that day and how we used the principles of recovery to make it through the day. And I remember also reading What Can I Do? Because it was in the little white book is all we have. We didn't have a basic text. And I was reading in there, what can I do to try to figure out how to work the steps of Narcotics Anonymous. And all it says is just work the first, go on, work step 2, go on to the next step, and so on and so forth, and go through kind of thing. And I says, well, how in the hell do you do it though? Don't say how. And we had to figure this out. And so we borrowed from the other fellowship, you know. And so I ended up writing a set of step work, with the way it was at that time. I don't know where that stuff is now, but eventually, we were able to use some of that, and everybody kind of gave some input, and we, from other things, and we found some step work. We came up with some step work. And, also at that time, you could use the big book of AA, and you would go in there and you would cross out all the A words and the S words, and you write in all of our words in its place. It was kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting, to say the least, when you do that. It was really interesting. So that all helped in the beginning. But now things changed. All of a sudden, there was this group that started called the Sunday Sunshine, and there was another group right behind it that started at the Oxford Apartments called the Oxford Group. And that Sunday Sunshine group became a key factor. What happened is they were the ones that got together, got with the literature committee, got the literature to help edit in the first edition of the basic text, and they got our group involved and some other groups. Also at this time, our groups weren't getting along very well. We didn't like each other. There was a lot of controversy. We didn't practice a good first tradition. And it's amazing and a miracle that we got anything done at all, just to be honest with you. But, our attitudes and our personalities were still altered, and we just clashed. We didn't see eye to eye on things, and we fought, and we didn't like each other. And I look back at those days, and it's a miracle that Narcotics Anonymous survived with the way it was. But over the years, it changed into what it is now. We survived. Even though I didn't think it would, it did. So what happened with our group grew to about 35 members, and it was doing really well, but I didn't know, and I hope that none of you ever have to experience this. But this is what happened to me, and it broke my heart. It was time for elections of officers in the group. This is right about the time they were forming an area. And so anyways, they voted. I declined the positions, and because I didn't want to be feeling like I was controlling the group, And so they voted the officers in. And then to my surprise, one of the people that were just voted in wanted to take a group conscience on changing the Joy of Living meeting into an AA meeting. This happened in about 1987 or 88. And they took a group conscience and they stole that meeting from us. And, I left that room broken. It broke my heart, and I was just about ready to throw the towel in and give up. But, my higher power works better than that in my life. And I pray that none of you out there ever have to experience anything like that ever happened to you. They just wanted our room, and they came in and they took it over through a group conscience, and it was sad. But I walked away that day, and then I started attending the other meetings. And I was like Vito, you know, if you wanted to hit enough meetings, you had to go to AA too. But the time came where the groups started to grow more, and I was a volunteer out to the state penitentiary, and I bring NA meetings in one-on-one to the inmates in the state penitentiary. And I did that for a few years, you know, and one day I was walking out of that prison meeting, and I saw two guys that I knew from a group walking up, and I says, "What are you guys doing here?" And they says, "Well, we're the H&I committee, and we're bringing a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous in here." And I says, "H&I?" And that's how I first learned that they had formed an area and they didn't include us, you know. And so anyways, a lot of things like that happened back then for us. But, you know, I became a part of that area, and I got involved. That meeting eventually became a meeting over in the farm dorm area, over on the farm part of the prison, and I attended it. And I knew a lot of the people that were coming and supporting that group, and we did really well. But, you know, the area had to start somewhere. So that was the first area in Idaho. It was called the Treasure Valley area. And then the next area that started was over to the east, over around Idaho Falls, around in that area. I can't remember if it's Snake River or what it is. But my sponsee, I had a sponsee over there named JB, and he was essential in helping forming the region. And then at that time, it was the Northern Idaho, Oregon region that became a region. And so NA started to flourish there and started to grow. So what happened was that chairperson, the secretary from the Joy of Living meeting went and got the information, or they sent her some information and editing in the basic text. And the stuff they got to work with was really nice. It looked really good. Everything was numbered and everything. And they had this one big pile of papers that wasn't numbered, didn't say NA on it, and they gave it to me, and this is it right here. This is what they gave me. It wasn't in a binder. It's not printed on the other side, but that's what they gave me, and that was my original manuscript. So it must have been something earlier than what they had. I don't know, but I never thought much of it, but I was happy to have it, and I used it. And today, when I think about going through the editing in that, and I think about, oh no, okay, I was showing you guys, this is my original manuscript. That was the one that we went through the change to make the changes to get this book, the Gray Book. And then when this one came out, the first edition, it was completely different from the manuscript pretty much as well. And then later on, it ended up with this. The first edition actually came out in 1983. The second was 83. The third edition, 1984. The revised was 1986. The fourth edition, 1987. The fifth edition, 1988 to 2007. And today's edition, 2008 to present. That's all the literature that I use in my life today. You know, that's how I do my program. I work my step work out of it. I sponsor sponsees there in Idaho and all around. Vito is my sponsor. And, you know, I got to say that back in the day, though, when all this was coming about, we weren't too clear on the message because we didn't have a book. And one day, you know, I was standing in front of the hospital at St. Alphonsus waiting for a meeting to start. And I saw this group of ladies come walking up to the meeting, and we were still working in the basic text, but I saw them carrying a book, and I thought they were coming to our meeting. And I says to them, when did the book come out? And they says, oh, about 1980, 81. I says, can I see it? And they showed it to me. It was a brown book, and it said, Overeaters Anonymous. And I says, you mean to tell me Overeaters Anonymous had a book before Narcotics Anonymous? I was just stunned by that. And you know, and I can remember sitting in meetings down on State Street. There was a place there where they met, and it was called the Greenhouse. And I went in there one day, and I sat on the couch. There was two guys on either side of me, you know. And as I'm sitting there, I can smell these guys are reaping of alcohol, you know. And I says to the one guy, I says, dude, have you been drinking? And he says, well, hell yeah. He says, I don't have a drinking problem. I have a heroin problem. And the same thing with the other guy on the other side of me. I was sitting in the middle of them. And you know, in 1986, when the revised edition came out, I really breathed a sigh, because that was when the readings changed and they talked about alcohol differently in the readings. Alcohol is a drug, period. And I was so happy for that when that changed. And that started to bring about a lot of changes. But, you know, when that first edition of Narcotics Anonymous came out, after we worked in the manuscript and the gray book came out, then the first edition didn't get to us until like in 1983. And I was under the impression we would have had it earlier. But when the first printer got the money to print the first edition, the money got lost, or he took the money, and that really hurt. That devastated us when we found that out. But they told us, they came clean with us and told us the money had been stolen. And I can remember us chipping together and sending money to help get that book printed. And, you know, my book cost me $25, my first red book, the one I showed you. It cost me $25 to get that book. And I don't know if you know it, but in 1983, 85, you know, $25 was a lot of money when you were living on slim pickings, you know. And also in that early time for me, as we were editing in the book during that period of time, 1980 and 81 and 82, I was putting myself through college, you know, because when you get clean, you get a life. When you find freedom from active addiction, you find the freedom to become and do with yourself what you really want to do and who you really want to be. And I put myself through college those first 2 years. You know, in 2 years of my recovery, I put myself through college full time. I raised a son, and I held a full-time job for those 2 years. And I'll tell you, they were the two most difficult years of my life. But I hit meetings every day. I hit meetings every day. Every day I still made it to a meeting. No matter what, I managed to find time to get a meeting in. And you know, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about, you know, with me, there was no excuses for me not to be at a meeting, because for me, to be at a meeting meant my life. And I looked at my recovery like taking an insurance policy out on my life in recovery. And that meant I had to become willing to do whatever it took to keep the meetings afloat and support the groups, join a home group, become involved with that group, and do whatever it took to keep that group alive, because my very life depended on it, and I knew it. So, you know, I'm very grateful for what Narcotics Anonymous has given me in my life today, an opportunity to find out and discover and uncover who I really am, and to let that person really come out. But in those early days, I never thought I would ever have to be sitting here like this, sharing my experience with you. In 2003, I moved from Idaho to Minnesota, and there was no NA there. And I started a meeting in my shop. And then there was 2 meetings until we had about 15 meetings a week in a town of 10,000 people. And then there was meetings in towns around 25, 30, 18, 20, 30, 60 miles away. And we were starting to get together and support those groups. And, eventually we formed into an area there that was called the Southwest Minnesota area. And I think it was 2008, January of 2008, I moved to Watertown, South Dakota. And within 6 months, that area had completely collapsed. And it collapsed because they didn't follow the traditions. They couldn't get along with each other. They couldn't cooperate in unity out of a spirit of cooperation and unity with each other. All they did was fight, and they collapsed. Well, later on that area started back up again, and it's doing okay now, and it's still going. So it had its low spots. They had to learn from the low, and then they put it back together. And today, Southwest Minnesota area is still alive and free. Now here in South Dakota, they had 3 or 4 areas. I can't remember. It was at least 3 or 4. And then and I'm not trying to upset anybody on here if they're from South Dakota, but what happened is the same thing. There was starting to be difference of opinions, and then the next thing you know, there's only one last surviving area in South Dakota, and that was the West Valley side, and they're a lot stronger over there. And today they're still struggling and working towards putting back the East River area on the east side of the state. So that's where we are here in South Dakota right now. And a lot of the times, if I want to go out to meetings, I got to drive 100 miles to a meeting. And, it's just the way it is here. And then I'm really grateful for these online meetings because technology has changed so much. Those of us that were in NA back in the Beatles' time and my time, you never dreamed that we would ever be seeing things like this happen in recovery. It was beyond our mental capacity to see what's going on in NA today here. It's overwhelming. It overpowers me sometimes to be able to even talk to you guys on this kind of a scale. So I just want to tell you guys that, when you think that you had enough of a group that you're a member of, if you think that you had enough of an area that you're a part of or a region, and things ain't going into tune the way you would like to see them go, well, in that second tradition, one of the hardest things for me to do was to give up my opinion to go along with what the group conscience, and that's where we believe our higher power speaks, is through the majority. And, I had to learn how to humble myself with my higher power to go along with the conscience. And so that's what I did. Along my journey, I had to learn to go along with a lot of group consciences, whether they agreed with mine or not. It didn't matter. Whether they agreed with me or not, it didn't matter. I had to learn how to go along with the flu and get along with everybody and play well with others. And I was listening to Vito speak, and he really flashed me back. There was a time where I was looking into some of this stuff about Narcotics Anonymous and how we got our name, and I really highly respect Danny C. and Ray and Jimmy and Bob and the guys that hung in there, and Bo and all the people that hung in there, the predecessors of the fellowship. But I want to tell you guys that everybody that I was looking up here, I can't see you because my phone screen's black, but I want to tell you that everybody that was on here today, everybody that is in the fellowship today is a predecessor of Narcotics Anonymous, because we're all working towards a common goal here. And that goal is to reach to that person that's not into the rooms yet of Narcotics Anonymous and reach out to them so that they can have an opportunity like we had when we first came around. When I first came around, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. Everything sick walked into the room. And as time went on, I started to change, and the way I viewed life and the way I saw life started to change, and it got better. And today it's great. The way I see life today is great, and it's wonderful. But you know, I want to share a moment in time with you. I want to tell you guys about what it was like when we read the basic text in Narcotics Anonymous for the first time in a meeting, when we were reading the chapter. I want to show it to you, but I don't know if you can see it. But we were reading this chapter right here of Who is an Addict? Who is an Addict? We were reading it. And as we were reading the chapter, the addicts were crying in the room. Now, I got to tell you, I never had a more spiritual experience or an awakening or eye-opening thing that ever touched me in my heart and my life in recovery the way that did, is when we were reading the book for the first time, and the members in the room were crying as they were reading because of the gratitude and how grateful they were that we had a book. And for the first time, you know, I got to tell you, for the first time, it made Narcotics Anonymous feel wholesome. It made us whole again. We had a book. It was precious. It was special. It meant something. When I see a book of Narcotics Anonymous, a gray book or a manuscript or a baby blue or a 6th edition, it don't matter. It talks to my heart. That's our literature from the beginning to present. That's our literature. And we should never take that for granted. All of us addicts in recovery, you know why we survived in Idaho? Because of that first tradition. If you live a first true tradition and you live it truly in your heart, you can't fail. You can't fail because you can't dissolve from the inside out. You can't fail. It's an ongoing process of allowing other members to be who they are and be grateful and what they say and what they say, and then let them be who they are and you be who you are in recovery. Be grateful. We really need to pull tight, especially right now, and pull that spirit of unity back into the core and the heart, the very heartbeat of Narcotics Anonymous, because all of our lives depend on this. We got to quit the bickering. And, you know, I see a lot of conflict going on, the differences between different various groups. But we're all the same here in Narcotics Anonymous. There's no one different. The one thing I do know is that I have never seen a well person in Narcotics Anonymous. Not one. We're here because we're sick. We're here because we need help. And because we need the help, that's why we need each other. And without each other, we can't succeed. And so we all have to grab that spirit of unity and pull together and become a whole fellowship and not work towards becoming a divided fellowship. Let everybody be who they are. It's okay. Narcotics Anonymous is going to be just fine at the end of the day. And I think that I kind of talked myself out, so I'm going to pass with that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chet. Okay, real quick, I think we need to give Chet a hand. This is always crazy, but I'm going to unmute all real quick. Chet.
Thank you.
Correct. Hey,